What's up, everybody? My name is Gerasimos. I'm doing the intro today. My training wheels are off. Joel passed over this responsibility to me.
You make that joke every single time. You've done
Yeah,
at
'cause it's
least
only
15, done at least 15 intros now.
I don't know about 15. We'll see. Well, anyways, we got another amazing episode for you today. This is one of my favorite subjects, obviously. We have Melissa Sell coming back on for the sixth time. This time we are exploring the controversial subject of quote unquote sexually transmitted diseases and what they really are from the German new medicine standpoint. So this is a really deep conversation. We explore some of the history around HIV and AIDS. We get into herpes, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and some other things, and what they mean from a genome model. So hopefully you enjoy it.
Yeah. Right before we bring Melissa on, I just want to let you guys know there's about 5 or 6 more days left only to submit an application for the next round of Rise Above the Herd, which starts on October 15th. This is a 10-week psycho-spiritual program for you to really unleash your power, step deeper into authenticity, bring more integrity, more alignment into your life. Personally, we don't believe there's anything as holistic as this program out there. So if you're down for 10 weeks of a personal development, hanging out with us, having a laugh, getting real, becoming more nuanced, discovering more parts of yourself, exploring your shadow, activating your creative life force, then we can help. RiseAboveTheHerd.co, 12 spots only.
You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Gerasimos.
Dr. Melissa Sell returns for the 6th time to the Here for the Truth podcast, number 6. I'm sure many of our listeners are very familiar with you, but for those that aren't, Melissa, she presents incredible information on the health system of German new medicine. This is paradigm shattering in many ways. I highly recommend people check out our previous episodes. The last one we did, The Legend of Dr. Harmer, episode 163, is an amazing foundations episode into this topic. And today we're going to be exploring sexual health and STDs through a German new medicine focused lens. So, Melissa, great to see you as always. It was awesome hanging out at Music and Sky just recently and getting connected a bit deeper. Welcome back.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. This is going to be a very fun, very liberating topic to cover because just like everything with German new medicine, Germanic healing knowledge, it just turns it upside down. Everything we were indoctrinated and told and scared into believing about health and disease, we come to find out there is a whole different dimension of understanding that is available to us. And so this one I particularly enjoy. Every time I've consulted with someone who this was their thing, like this was their symptom. And when I share with them the facts, the biological understanding of why their tissues in a particular area of their body would be adapting, they see it with clarity, the shame, the discomfort that came with having this particular category of symptom falls away when you're like, actually, this makes a whole lot of sense. So this is a great one to share with the world and your audience.
Yeah, I'm really excited, because I think there's so much noise wrapped around this subject. And when you think about like when we were younger and all the advertisements on TV and like in health class or whatever class we took where they were just like, you can't have sex or this is what's going to happen to you. And it's like, it's so fucked up when you think about it. At the end of the day, like how many, like, your teenage years or your years in your 20s are, when I guess people were a little bit more sexually active depending on their life, like how much this takes up their thinking and their consciousness. And, I really like, there's a self-righteous part of me that comes out where it's like, I want everyone to understand this knowledge, this deeper understanding of how our biology functions. So you don't have to live in fear. And yes, sure, we've had episodes and we've talked about, other symptoms that present, but when we get into this topic of so-called sexually transmitted diseases, it just operates on a completely different level, like at the core of our being, something that is so rooted in us as human beings, sexuality, having sex, intimate relationships, connecting with others. I just want to shine more light on this. So thank you for, being here, and thank you for the work that you do on this subject.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of times they're even, referring it to STI, sexually transmitted infection. So we've got infection, we have disease, we have the concept of these entities, so it comes back to the idea of germ theory and this idea that there's little scary, bad things that live, especially on your sexual organs, that can hop from person to person and create disease, right? They can create infection. And then once you have it, you are marred forever. You are, forever marked with the big S, right? Like you've got the STD, the STI. You have this bad thing now, and so there's so many implications, and there's so many false assumptions about the way nature works, or about the way biology works. And it's one of those things. And anytime we talk about contagion, it can seem very just simple. You had it. Then we got together, and then I had it, you gave it to me, right? But that is just assuming that the only thing that transpires when sexual contact takes place is just bodies touching, right? Like if it's just bodies touching, and there's, we're not thinking about anything else, it's like, okay, so we look at the material. Material touches material. There's material on here that hops over here. Materialism. And you can just keep it at that level, and you're like, okay, this makes sense. I did something naughty and bad, right? I did something I shouldn't have done, and now I'm being punished for it now. And then we have, good and evil. We have religious concepts in here, and you see how it just kind of maps onto our experience, and people don't ever think to question it until you come across something like this.
Yeah. Do you think the psychology of religion and all the fear paradigm that is probably festering at the base of the collective psyche plays a role in the enhancement and the proliferation of this, as well as we know that German New Medicine is a psychological paradigm as well?
Absolutely. I mean, how could it not? Because the lens of religious programming colors everything, right? And especially, it seems to be particularly rigid around sexual expression, right? We want to, control this impulse, this thing that in some religions is seen as like this evil and this bad and this wrong thing that needs to be suppressed. And then if it comes out, so it absolutely is shaping a person. And even just, sex in nature is just so simple. When you look at animals, when you look at nature, there's no weirdness, there's no discomfort, there's no rules, there's just hierarchy, right? Hierarchy is what determines the copulation strategies of the animals. And it's just simple and basic and no big deal. And there's no big, lecture that you need to give your children at a certain... When do animals talk to their offspring about sex? Never. They don't do that. There's no communication about it. It's just a natural progression. But because religious ideas and, we think we need to instill values and make sure you're doing this and not doing that, of course, this is going to get very muddled. And obviously, like this source of great pleasure, right? Because there can be other conflicts that lead to compulsive sexual expression, and so, but isn't it funny that when we suppress the sexual expression, we give people conflicts around their sexuality, that is what tends to enhance and amplify sexual compulsion and the need to express. And so it gets really messy, I think, because people are trying to do the right thing, but in their efforts to do the right thing, often we screw things up beyond imagination.
Well, yeah, and also the differences between animals and humans, there are differences, of course, from a consciousness standpoint.
I've seen some ducks huddle in a circle, bro. Who knows what they're talking about?
Yeah, but
can we do sexual?
But even just like there's more noise that comes, obviously being a human, because we have a mind that's that's different than animals, that thinks in a certain way, and that there's probably a lot of animals where consent isn't a thing, where it's like the alpha just rolls up and goes, listen, you're mine, and that's it. I'm gonna do my thing, and you're gonna have babies that come out of you. Real quickly, before we get into all this, I want to ask you, do you think? Well, let me talk to our audience. We've done 5 episodes previous to this. We've got into a whole bunch of subjects around GNM. Our most recent one that Joel mentioned really gets into the summary of Dr. Hummer's story and his 5 biological laws. So do you usually like when you get into the subject to give like a brief little quick rundown of like 5 biological laws in relation to this? Or do you want to just like go into talking about like, let's just go down a list of maybe certain common STDs, STIs and explore them?
I think let's just hit it. This is more an advanced conversation.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Well,
Thanks for answering the question. Thanks for answering the question that I asked her.
No worries, right?
It'll become obvious as we get into the specifics. We can overview each of the laws within it.
Yeah, and anyone listening, just go watch our recent episode, maybe even before this. Okay,
episode 163. Yeah.
Okay. Well, where would you like to start?
Well, I have one commentary. I think with a necessary preface, because like I don't think that we're saying that there should be no discernment around sex, right? Because I mean, from my perspective, there is like probably spiritual, hygienic factors and components and energetic things to consider as well. But it is the fear-mongering and the fear porn, which obviously presents an issue.
Certainly, yes. And so, yeah, I mean, there are things that make sense, right? It's the conscious mind has the ability to be discerning about doing what makes sense. I mean, this is like, I think this came up in one of the conversations, maybe the sexuality one, like the fact that the woman or the young girl becomes sexually mature at age 11 when she can ovulate and conceive, it doesn't make sense for her to begin having children at that point, right? Like in nature, that makes sense. For the human who has, more development and more maturing to do during those years, it doesn't make sense for humans to procreate at age 11, even though they're biologically able to. So absolutely, there are things that we want to, model for our children about what makes sense with regards to pair bonding and mate choice and not being driven solely by the impulse to procreate, right? And controlling and directing that. And, I love Napoleon Hill, talks a lot about sex transmutation, this energy. Mm-hmm. So this desire, this impulse, it's a creative impulse. And so, during certain years where it may not make sense for young people to be engaging in sexual activity, teaching them how to channel that. It's like, hey, this is a creative force of the universe that you can use to build your business, to grow ideas, to do other things. And so absolutely harnessing the energy of sex and realizing that it's this creative life force and using it when it makes sense and having containers around, intercourse, I think makes a lot of sense. And again, not rigidity and shame and it's bad. And if you do this, not turning it into something that a person feels bad about, but just something that they can make choices, right? Conscious choice reigns supreme. And so if a person is making conscious choices, and obviously the conscious choices you make when you're 15 are going to be different than the ones that you make when you're, 21, 25. And so, at every stage, we have to kind of honor where we are and know that, we are going to be driven to do what makes sense in the context of our culture, of our society. And that's the thing is when, society really, if society as a whole was doing what made sense, right? It made sense to protect the family, because that's ultimately really what we want to do. And the thing that gets, we're rigid, religious, like Christian ideas that can be very shame-inducing. Also, we can see how, it actually, there is some sense there too, because it's protecting the family, right? It's the ideal of having a mother and a father in a sacred union together, and they stay within this container so they can raise their children, and that makes sense because those children who are in a stable environment like that are much less likely to encounter conflicts of, infidelity and divorce. But that's the thing. The religious structure does not guarantee that these things don't happen. And so...
Yeah, and especially like if within the religious structure, a lot of the education is very like strict and dogmatic and fear-based. I think that's going to cause way more of a split in a person's psyche, feeling like, God's watching over every thought and every act and every deed that they make. Well, I think to start this off, why don't we just start with the big one? To get into it, because it's a subject that got me going down, questioning a lot of things around health, around the government, around the scientific establishment. When I first came across Dr. Carey Mullis's autobiography in 2005, called Dancing Naked in the Minefield, and he was challenging the conventional I mean, he wasn't looking at things from a G&M standpoint, but he was challenging the HIV equals AIDS hypotheses. So from a G&M standpoint, and I believe Dr. Hammer wrote a book on this. Was that book been translated or is it in German?
It is in German. I have it right here.
The Germans.
AIDS, the disease that does not exist. I have only been able to read chunks of it because it is in German. But yes, he wrote an entire book about it.
So why don't we go into HIV/AIDS, because I feel like this is what started this whole, or continued, let's say, the viral craze in the 80s and instilled so much fear into people, especially as the media was growing. Like what are your thoughts on it? What is it from a G&M standpoint? And then we'll kind of go on from there.
Yeah, well, it is totally dependent on the symptoms that the individual expresses, because in the House of Numbers documentary, if you have not seen that, it's on YouTube, go watch it. It just lays out how in different countries, AIDS is labeled something different. It's like they changed the diagnosis label and all the case numbers would increase. I mean, it's just like the scamdemic. It's a collection of symptoms that we can label with a disease name and cause all sorts of hysteria and panic. Like the CDC, and they talked about this in that documentary, the CDC was looking, their funding was plummeting after, because polio was over and they needed a new disease. Carrie Mullis, he even said that there were like flyers up around in the CDC saying, we need a new pandemic. We need a new disease, and here comes out of the woodwork this collection of symptoms that they label, that there's this HIV virus that causes this immune deficiency syndrome, which is such a broad category. And then they go over to Africa and they would just look at people who were losing weight and say, you have AIDS. Anyone who's just losing weight, they didn't have testing for it. And so there is no thing, it's a disease that does not exist, according to Dr. Hammer. It is a collection of symptoms. Now, if a person is presenting with, lung symptoms and liver symptoms and we have to look each individual conflict. And when they test for something, what they test for are antibodies. And antibodies are simply microproteins created by the body in the wake of a conflict shock. And so there is no association between these antibodies and a scary disease. But as soon as that idea is planted into someone's mind, it's terrifying. As a child, I was afraid. There was some news report of, beware, the little change area where you would, if you were at a payphone and like where the coins came down, or if you were, you put the coin in and you get some little toy or something, that those little chutes that people would put dirty needles in there, and that if you touched the dirty needle, you would get AIDS. Like that was implanted in my mind as a child, right? Mm-hmm. So this scary idea of this scary, mysterious, but very, very bad disease called AIDS that you could just get from, and then just like with the contagion thing. Oh, can you get it from hugging? Can you get it from kissing? Can you get it from, does it have to be bodily fluid contact? All of that is just an idea that was implanted into people's mind to build up this, because all of a sudden the CDC started getting so much money for research. And so they were back in business with AIDS. And so we have to look at always just what symptoms is the person expressing, and the symptoms tell the story of the experience the individual had.
Yeah, and funnily enough, who was at the helm of all this? Mr. Anthony Fauci. There was a lot of correlations between HIV and AIDS and SARS-CoV-2 and COVID. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous when you think about it. Like HIV then causes like all this like laundry list of different quote unquote diseases or symptoms.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah. All the testing is indirect, and it's super interesting. So like, when they say, oh, we need to give someone a vaccine so we can boost their antibodies, right? Because like the whole idea is, oh, if we give you the vaccine, your body mounts an attack. But in the case of the AIDS situation, they test you. And if you have the antibodies, that means you have the disease. It's like, it's such a bizarre situation. And if you're still in the germ theory, and if you're still in the idea that external bugs and germs are just floating around in other people's bodies that can come along and make you sick, you're vulnerable to these ideas. But when you understand the connection between experience and adaptation, that's what it is. That's the story with all so-called STDs, STIs, there's an experience. And of course, things of a sexual nature, right, have so many more opportunities to produce conflicts. Because like we talked about, we've got the religion thing, we've got, just naked bodies touching. I mean, there's sensations, there's smells, there's fluids, there's stuff, right?
There's big self-worth components wrapped up in that too, right?
Certainly, absolutely. And yeah, my security with myself, with my body. I mean, one wrong glance, one wrong word during the intimate contact or in the wake of the intimate contact can set off a conflict. I mean, that is the power of words is tremendous in the psyche. One word, one glance, one assumption made by the psyche. It doesn't even have to be real, right? As long as it's perceived by you. If I have severe self-devaluation, if I'm severely insecure, a lot of people are insecure sexually because of things like pornography, and they are comparing their real life experiences to, what they've seen on the screen. And if they feel that their partner is disappointed with something about their physical form or their performance or whatever, that's all it takes. Right. And then we have we also have the potential for pregnancy, which again can bring huge fear, huge shame, all of that. So it makes sense that sex in particular is rife for potential conflicts. And so that's all we are looking for. If you develop symptoms following a sexual encounter, it's not because you now are, soiled and dirtied with some yucky germ that got on your private parts. It's you experienced a conflict. In that situation, your tissues adapted. And typically by the time you have any symptoms, you're already in the healing phase. The body is already going through the repair. And then you get into the vicious cycle, so we could talk about herpes, for example. So this is, one of the most common ones that I encounter and have talked to people about. We got it on the mouth and we have it on the genitals. And what is it? It is a squamous tissue adaptation. So that's the outer skin. And when we are really either desperately wanting contact, right? I'm feeling separated from my lover, from my partner, from, intimacy. I'm feeling separated, or I want to separate. This was not good contact. I did not like this. This was an unwanted touch, unpleasant touch. During the active conflict, there's erosion, micro-ulceration in the tissue, right? So we dig a little hole during the active conflict that numbs the tissue, causes memory loss. And then during the healing phase, so once you are like, okay, well, that's over, I'm never going to do that again after the encounter, or you're like, oh, what a relief. That was so wonderful. I'm so happy to be reunited with my love. The tissue starts to repair and rebuild. And then you go, oh dear, there seems to be a sore in my private parts. And then you freak out, right? You freak out because you think, oh no, I have something, right? We equate, just because of how we've been raised, we equate an area that is red and inflamed and uncomfortable and swollen with an infection. And we think, oh dear, there's something bad going on here. And then if they test it, if they swab it, they could, give you a diagnosis of, oh, you have herpes. You have this virus and it's never going to go away. And now you're going to just have to manage, and you're going to have to, bear this shame and tell everybody that, you're ever going to have contact with, that you had this thing called herpes. When what you had was an experience of separation regarding intimacy. Now, the thing is, and the reason why it seems like you'll always have it or it can come back out, is because of tracks, right? So the biology, the psyche remembers everything about the experience. And so sex itself, intimate contact itself, can become a track. And so because that happened one time where you were, again, you didn't like the contact, or let's say you can even after the fact, if someone tells you, oh, you slept with that guy? Ooh, here's some things I know about him, right? And so in the wake of it, and then you can have the conflict. And how often have they experienced, oh, there was infidelity in the relationship, right? And then you brought it back to our bed, right? You were not faithful. You went to be with someone else. And then, the idea that you brought it back to the bed. Again, we brought what? We're thinking about a bug. How come we're not talking about the experience of, leaving the confines of the relationship and being, not faithful to your partner and going with someone else, having fun, and that person had split energy, right? About, when you're in a committed relationship with someone and you go outside of that relationship for whatever reason, you are thinking about it. Like it's going on to some degree. Even if you're drunk, at some point you're coming to a realization of, I should not have done that, or I shouldn't be doing this, or this is wrong to be doing, right? There's a separate, and it's also that split energy of like, I'm really, emotionally, sexually drawn to this person to have this contact, but I shouldn't. And that push-pull. I want to, but I can. But I want to, but I can't. There's often an element of push-pull when there is a separation conflict. So it can be both sides of that wanting and not wanting contact. And then, when the symptoms arise, that means the tissue is in repair now. And if we have the right context and the right understanding, well, we can learn a lot about ourselves, right? Learn a lot about, how we experience that and how to move forward, and so that's just, one of the examples of herpes and the separation. And it happens with the mouth too, right? I want this kiss. I don't want this kiss. I remember in high school, it was don't drink off anybody's bottle, right? Because if you drink off, that girl, she has, mouth herpes, or she'll get these, big outbreaks on her lips. And so you don't want to catch the germ from her, because once you have it for life. And these things have been so well embedded, we just think they're the truth, rather than understanding that, she maybe got an unwanted kiss from, her uncle that was really, smelled like cigarettes, and she was really disgusted by him, and, don't touch my, and so that could have been the reason that she developed herpes on her mouth, these sores that would come on her mouth because of an unwanted touch there. And now she is marked as, that girl has, this gross mouth thing, so don't drink off of her drink. And so again, it just kind of puts all of these little ideas into the mind about what's the problem? The little bug's the problem, rather than the experience of the entirety of the individual.
Yeah, consciousness gets left at the door so often. I think that's what I love so much about GNM and its like holistic approach to understanding. It also makes you think of too, just like how substances, alcohol and other substances, like just create even more like fertile soil for these types of conflicts. Cause like even just that phrase, like the walk of shame, it's like you have a one night stand or whatever, you're drunk, and then it's like 7 a.m. and you're just rolling out of bed, hungover, like walking back home or driving back home or whatever. And like what goes on in your conscious, I can't believe I did that, So it's just such a different fucking paradigm of understanding this. Okay, so we touched upon HIV. Oh, real quickly too with HIV/AIDS, like the diagnosis shock too, and the impact that has, because, we've been fed so much fear around this. And let's say someone does their yearly checkup, and then maybe they've gone through some kind of adaptation or something, and then they take a fucking Western blot or Lisa whatever the test, Lisa, I don't know how it's pronounced. And then they just test positive, and like their doctor comes in and they're like, yeah, sorry, you tested positive for HIV. Like, what does that do to a person?
I mean, exactly. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy when we, place this, we cast a spell on someone. We say, you have this really bad, scary disease, and then we say, lung, AIDS affects the lungs as well. And it's like, no, the diagnosis caused the death rate shock, right? It caused a feeling soiled conflict. And now I've got these, melanin, because there's like a skin thing too. I think Kaposi sarcoma, all these, other adaptations. And it's like, think about the experience. Everything makes sense when you are looking at the experience of the person, what they went through, what the shock, when they were told that, what happened, right? And so death, fright, all sorts of other conflicts that come as a result. Same thing happens with cancer. Same thing can happen even with herpes. Like, it's like, here, you've been diagnosed with something, and now you have a self-evaluation, right? Now you're feeling this sense of shame, where before you're like, you weren't experiencing that until someone told you something bad is happening on your body. You have, a disease, you have a diagnosis label, and that's, one of the worst things you can do to a person.
Yeah. I mean, I think about the early days of HIV/AIDS and, whatever, late 70s, early 80s, in the gay community, like what conflicts were present there at that time. I mean, today, obviously, like if you're gay, it's not a big deal, but like we're looking at the late 70s and early 80s, like the climate wasn't what it is today. And so on top of like all the sexual partners, on top of all the drugs, like what impact does that have on the body? And I think that's why like I get so angry that I think it was like Robert Gallo like teamed up with Margaret Heckler. She was the Health and Human Services at the time. They just come on TV and they're just like, yeah, we found the cause of AIDS, like no real science behind it. not sending their data to other scientists to check for it. And then everyone, as it usually happens, the media runs with it. The gay community jumps on board. They go, it's not our lifestyle and other things. It's this virus that's getting us. And then, the rest is history.
They find a couple poster childs, Freddie Mercury, Magic Johnson. I mean, those images of Freddie Mercury towards the end, so skinny, like that stuff's embedded in people's psyche. Like they definitely did a good marketing job in it makes you shut up. It makes most people shut up when they hear HIV and AIDS and things like that. Then didn't they even have the Live Aid concert as well, just amplifying all of that? Oh yeah, on top of that.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this too, because I know in the GNM model, there's like heavy toxicity, malnutrition, physical industry that kind of falls outside the DHS model. Now, in the case of AZT, obviously a lot of these people have the shocks and they have these biological programs running, but a lot of people say that the AZT, caused a lot of these deaths because it was such heavy toxicity. It was a failed cancer drug that a lot of people were dying from liver failure due to toxicity. Does that align at all, or do you think that there are other conflicts that are having more of an impact on why a person dies versus the toxicity of the drug?
Oh, totally could be a drug. I mean, that is a poison. And that is, and always we look at both. Okay, so the symptom is indicating potentially this type of biological program. But if you are putting some type of poison into your body, that also, that's like a mechanical disruption of the way the body functions. And so, I wouldn't rule that out at all, that this heavy, intense medication supposedly to help was contributing to additional symptoms, and the body, when you're poisoning your body is less capable of recovery. It slows down your healing capacity, right? Because you've got a vital energy that the body is running all of your programs. It's digesting food. It's filtering out toxins but if all of a sudden we're putting in way more poison, that vital energy is going to be depleted in your body as it's going through these adaptation and healing phases. That's a heavy load, and so certainly that can be playing a role, and that is crazy to take these drugs so people who are already dealing with adaptations. Right. And then you put something into the body. And that's the thing. All drugs are poisons. All drugs are poisons. And the reasons they appear to work, right, is because they're poisoning the system. The body goes into sympathicatonia, right? That's the fight or flight. You exit the healing phase because majority of symptoms occur when we are in the healing phase. Remember, second biological law, we have the law of two phases. We have the conflict active phase. This is when we are actively in the conflict, vasoconstriction, cold hands. This is when the tissues are actively adapting. And then we chill, we relax, we resolve the conflict, and we move into the healing phase. The vagotonia, that's the vasodilation, the relaxation, the swelling, the inflammation, fatigue. Right? That's when the healing comes. That's when most of your symptoms happen. That's when you're like, I'm sick, or I have inflammation here. Ooh, that's painful. Or ooh, something's, red and inflamed and itchy. That's the healing phase. But then you take a drug, right? We take an antiviral, or we take, some type of chemical, and the body shifts because now it's being poisoned. Right now, it has to go back into fight or flight. It has to go back into the sympathicotonic phase. And so it's but then you're like, oh, what a relief. This drug really helps me. This drug has gotten rid of my symptoms. And it's well, the reason it did that is because it took you out of the healing and repair phase, and it constricted your blood vessels and put you back into the sympathetic phase. And so that's how people get stuck in a trap of taking drugs for things and steroids and you name it for suppression of symptoms, because I can't deal with these symptoms. And I want to get rid of them. And so, I take the medication, but it's a poison. Everything that you put into your body, it's either nourishing and supporting your body, or it's a poison that your body has to do its, work to get it out of the system. And so, we want to be nourishing and supporting our body and minimizing the inflow of any type of poison, let alone a pill that's this is what it's designed for.
Yeah. Do you think that herbs and other supplements can have a similar impact? It's really important to know whether or not, a certain Chinese herb is going to put you into a sympathetic state or support the body in its healing process. Obviously, probably not as extreme as pharmaceuticals, but I'm curious your thoughts on that.
A lot of people use herbs to kind of manage the symptoms of the healing phase and to mitigate, kind of make themselves more comfortable. And so certainly herbs do have, other vagotonic or sympathicotonic effects. And so it is, it would be helpful to know, what am I using and why am I using it? That doesn't mean don't use it. It means, use it with consciousness. It's like, I realize, sometimes people will take, even just mild painkillers or caffeine during the healing phase, simply to just kind of take the edge off, to make it less intense. And that as you lower the intensity of it, you're going to elongate the duration of it. But that's a very fine trade-off to make. And a lot of people will choose to do that for more comfort or more ability to kind of navigate your day. And so, using herbs and supplements and natural things to kind of accomplish a similar effect, but it isn't going to be as intense as something that's distilled in a laboratory, and, it's not going to be as potent.
Yeah. Do you find too, if someone goes through a really intense healing phase, like if they were to white knuckle it and maybe not take herbs or an aspirin or caffeine or whatever, that that can create another conflict, because they're dealing with such intense pain, and that their pain can cause them to think about themselves in a certain way? Have you noticed that at all? Or
all depends on the individual. Sometimes people, if they know, pain and suffering are different things. Pain is a physical sensation. Suffering is that's resistance. You're in resistance of what is currently happening. And so, if you can be in physical discomfort, have these sensations of pain and inflammation, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be in a state of agony and suffering. They're this is really uncomfortable. These are very intense sensations. But, and so it all depends on the person. A person who, you can fool yourself too. You can think, I'm strong, I can do this. And you're actually really super miserable, and you're having a really hard time. And, you're conflicted about all the pain, and there's, background fears. I would, do my best to just kind of be real with myself and honest, and say, okay, and notice, again, you discover so much about yourself when you are in these situations. I am committed to the model of GNM or holistic healing. And so you have an identity, right? So my identity is, I'm all holistic. I don't do any, I don't take any medication. I don't do any surgeries. But sometimes taking the medication or doing a surgery is the thing that's going to, help support you the best. And so, but if you're too married to your identity to do that, and that can become really problematic. And I've seen people kind of, be so married to it and want so badly to do it all natural and do it all holistically that they overlook things that could really be beneficial to them, or actually the way through this at this point, given the amount of adaptation, may be the surgical route. And so I really encourage people to notice, what disturbs me about the potential of this intervention, right? Is it, I don't think it's going to help me, or do I think it's going to jeopardize, my badge in the holistic, natural healers club, and if that's the case, you need to, come face to face with this identity that you're, clinging to, and why is this so important to you?
Yeah,
I have a personal recent experience around this. So recently we moved states within Mexico, and generally speaking, growing up in Australia, I experienced heavy classical quote unquote hay fever symptoms, right? When I was living in the Caribbean, there was nothing of the sort. Now we moved here, central Mexico, we have a lawn, we're surrounded by nature, etc. My first 3 weeks here were constant, insane burning eyes, constant sneezing. It was horrendous. It was very, very, very difficult to deal with. And then about 10 days ago, we had our eldest daughter's birthday. Lots of people coming over. I was like, I'm not doing this. I went and bought some antihistamines. I think it was Claritine, and I had one. And it was so much relief, 0 symptoms after 3 weeks, just intense symptoms. This is freaking amazing. And since then, I haven't had another one, and my symptoms are not present. It's probably reduced by 90% total. I'm nowhere near sneezing as much, nowhere near have burning eyes in the same kind of way. And so I just took the thing, and that seems to have somehow helped resolve it on a deeper level as well since then.
Fascinating. That's for, and yeah, because once you get into a cycle, of sneezing and watery eye. I mean, a person can be annoyed that these symptoms haven't gone away. You can kind of be in a vicious cycle, and then sometimes taking a little something to break that pattern, to break that loop. It sounds like you broke out.
I was, because like it was so intense, and every day I was like, what's the conflict? Like, what happened on grass? What, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like, it's kept bothering me so intensely. And then, since the relief of the symptom, it's like whatever happened seems to have had a more lasting effect. Yeah.
I can't believe this is the first I'm hearing that you took a pharmaceutical. My opinion of you has completely changed. I have to question our business partnership, actually.
Yeah. I was supplied by someone very close to you.
Okay, so let's get back to quote unquote STDs. So gonorrhea and chlamydia are two other ones that are, I would say, popular, but you know what I mean, more ubiquitous in the world. So can you explain those two symptoms or collection of symptoms from a G&M standpoint?
Yeah, so you have some intimacy with someone, and then in the next couple of days, you're like having burning urination and funky discharge, and then you go and have it tested, and they say, oh, it's chlamydia or it's gonorrhea. And all these bacterial infections are indicating is that in the intimate contact, there was an intense territory marking conflict of a sexual nature, right? So related to marking the territory. So if you are a man or a woman and how you perceive that, the woman is for inner territory, the man sees the woman as his territory, and if there was conflict around it, right? Like, was there a little bit of, catch me if you can? Was there a little bit of like playing hard to get, or like, am I going to, be able to mark this territory? Is she going to come home with me? Are we going to, am I going to seal the deal? Like there was some type of conflict around that. And so the more intense the adaptation of the urethra, so there's widening of the urethra. And if it's a particularly intense conflict, it can get even into the connective tissue beyond the squamous epithelial. And that's where the bacteria get involved, because in the red group, the squamous epithelium, there is no bacteria involved, but in the deeper layers of tissue, the bacteria come. Anytime there's bacteria, remember the fourth biological law, the bacteria are helpers. They are microsurgeons. They are there doing a job. So anywhere on the body, there's a funky odor, a funky discharge. And, if you get tested and they say, aha, there's a bacteria, this is the cause of your problem. The bacteria is not the cause of the problem. Bacteria is the cleanup crew that comes in after the adaptation. It's coming in helping to repair the tissue that was adapted during the intense territory marking conflict. And so when you can identify and understand, why did this happen? What was the experience? Why did I feel, violated in my territory? Or why, did I really desperately want to mark my territory, or feel like there was some type of, I felt intruded, right? If you didn't like something that happened in the encounter and you're like, that was, you kind of crossed my boundaries there, right? That's a territory thing. Having a boundary crossed during sex and not liking something that happened can cause the adaptation in those deeper layers in the urethra. And so that's what causes the gonorrhea or the chlamydia. Those are just little bacterial helpers that happen to assist in the genital region.
How does it differ from a UTI that deals with like territory marking conflicts?
It's the same conflict. It just depends on the intensity of it. And there's a sexual flavor to the gonorrhea, chlamydia one. So, the territory marking can be about your neighbor putting their, trash can in your driveway, right? Like, I need to mark my territory. It could be about something, but it's not there's no sexual theme with the neighbor or the person at work, but with gonorrhea, chlamydia, there's a sexual theme, right? There's something about intimate contact.
What are from a conventional model standpoint, what are the differences between like gonorrhea and chlamydia?
They're just different bacteria. And even when you look it up, there's just when you look up the symptoms, they say, it's discharge and discomfort during. There's not much difference from what I can tell from what I looked up. that there's really, it's just different helpers. And I would imagine that, that there's a different flavor, right, to the experience. I don't think that Dr. Hammer, to my knowledge, defined like this is the specific flavor of the chlamydia adaptation. This is the one for the gonorrhea, but that's how, just in my observation, that's how it works, is that there's a specific flavor dynamic that is present, vibration in that particular sexual territory marking shock that differs. And that's why the different bacteria come in to help.
Yeah. Can you, I know we're like delivering information on a lot of this stuff, but can you share any like case studies on some of this stuff, whether it's herpes or even gonorrhea, chlamydia, of any people maybe that you've worked with that like might highlight this and people can relate to?
Well, yeah, there was, a young woman, and this is interesting too, like in a dynamic where there's multiple people involved. She was involved in a throuple kind of situation where like she was kind of this third party that would come into the dynamic, and there was an energetic mismatch in with between her and one of the partners that created. She was having this ongoing, I think they call it bacterial vaginosis. And so this is, again, it's a sexual related, about, my boundaries. Am I feeling respected? Am I feeling, like a part of this partnership? And so this was an ongoing conflict, and, what did she have to do? She had to figure out what's this dynamic, right? And either come to terms with it and be okay with the way things are, or leave it, right? Because this symptom was ongoing, was recurring, and she went the route of doing the, antibiotics and trying to, get rid of it that way and change the diet and all of these things to try to assist. But it's like, you could do all of that. You can take the antibiotics, you can change your diet, you can do all of these things. But if you're going to continue in a relationship dynamic that you don't fully feel respected, or you don't fully feel like this is working for you, you got to figure it out, right? We have to have conversations, or we have to leave. And she reported later on that, her symptoms, as she became like 80% okay with the situation, her symptoms got 80% better. But it's like, okay, well, there's still that 20%. What's going on with that? And so that's where, it's all the degree of the conflict determines the degree of the adaptation. And so if we are mostly resolved, but it's still kind of there, that means that the situation is still kind of there. And it's always going to be a direct reflection. And so, we have to do that work of like, okay, what's preventing this last 20%, right? Like, does this mean I just have to leave the relationship, that this is no longer working for me? And so looking at that, figuring that out for yourself, and then making the change, that's going to be the thing that solves it. And so, looking at your relationship, how you feel about it, those moments when you're like at your worst, like this is always a good just kind of clue in general. Like when you're most upset about the situation and most unhappy about it, what are you saying to yourself, right?
Yeah.
That is where, you'll see the conflict in clear view, right? When it's, because, we can kind of cover it up and we can say, oh, well, it's not that bad. And we can, excuse certain things away. But in those moments where you're most frustrated about what's going on, look there, because that's going to give you clues about what's going on with the dynamic that's not working for you.
Yeah. Do you want to say something? Because I want to.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing too, and you may have touched on this a little bit, but for so many people, like they have parts of them that are kind of driving the wheel of their psyche, and like, oh no, I'm totally cool with this. I'm totally fine. So from a conscious level, they convince themselves, like you said, rationalize, oh, this is totally fine. But like, there's so much happening at this like subconscious level they're just not aware of. So like they could be confused on why they're having symptoms from a conscious standpoint, but they have to mine even deeper to really get like real with themselves on how this is impacting them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You can think I'm cool with this dynamic. This is fine. Or like, I'm a chill person, like people in polyamorous relationships. That actually I had, years ago worked with someone who was kind of in a polyamorous dynamic, and that created, there was I'm okay with this, but the symptoms were saying otherwise. Symptoms were saying, you're my territory and I am not comfortable with this dynamic.
Yeah. If you're not okay with it, you're not spiritual enough, you're not cool enough, so I can't show that. Anyways.
Yeah. One thought came to mind when we talk about STDs and the relationship between, I guess, unwanted contact. Like, I'm sure no woman really loves visiting a gynecologist, right? And like even just general like cervical screenings. I'm just wondering like how this can create a cycle as well. Then we have this whole HPV, which has no symptoms, but like somehow everyone is going to get at some point, right? And then the vaccine around that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it all depends on the woman and her experience and how, yeah, but certainly any kind of, I mean, there's this podcast, Steve and I listened to, is so crazy. It's about this gynecologist who was this like well-respected, I think went to Columbia, and so he was just this well-renowned, whatever, gynecologist, but he was like licking women and touching them in inappropriate ways. And also, and these women are like, did that just happen? What was that sensation I just felt? And it's just wild to think. And I'm sure after the fact that these women were having conflicts and outbreaks and who knows what. But yeah, that's the malpractice in the industry certainly could be something that could cause a conflict. But
yeah, it would be really interesting. The whole scandal that happened with Larry Nassar, who was the sports physician for the U.S. gymnastics. Like, if these gymnasts like were interviewed to find out like were they dealing with any kind of STIs, STDs, and how that obviously relates to everything we're talking about right now. I'm not sure if any of them have come out to say, hey, they've had certain, they were dealing with this or not. But it just made me think of that because it was such a popular story in the mainstream news for so long.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it comes to a story of a woman who, neither of the partners she was with, either the current one or the previous one, nobody had the STD. No one else had it, but she did. And it was like, because she regretted the experience with one of the people, but if that person didn't regret the experience with you, and so that's where, how is it if these things are truly contagious? You would think that everybody would be expressing it. And they'll say, oh, some people's immune systems are stronger. And that's where we do have to look at the idea of the immune system. This concept, again, it all stems from this idea of bad germs, bad microbes that cause problems, and the body mounts a defense against it. And this is not how biology works. There isn't a war between good and evil at the micro level. There's simply cleanup crews that are making sure that the tissues are restored following an experience. And it's the person didn't have that same experience. It's not that they got exposed to the germ, but their body was able to mount a defense. That's the idea that we have about it. But when you look, one person had the experience, the other one didn't. This person was fine with it. This person really regretted it. And so despite having had the contact, the one that expresses the symptoms had the conflict. The one who doesn't express the symptoms did not have the conflict. And that's where, all contagion conversations, we have to look at what's the shared experience. So some people still get really fixated on, well, they had a cold, I was near them, and then I got the cold, right? And so what was your experience of being around that person, right? I mean, it is to be in close contact with someone, even to be caring for someone. There was experiences I've had with Steve where he's expressing symptoms as I'm caring for him, right? And it's like, oh, and I start to express the symptoms because there is something going on with me when you're caring and tending to someone who has symptoms, right? And there's ideas that are lodged deep back in the psyche about contagion, about sickness. And so we do have to observe, because a lot of people will find this as a sticking point. They're like, but I was around them and I got sick. And I don't think I had a conflict. But that's the thing, not thinking there's like the deep underneath, it's like the iceberg, right? Like on top of it, it's like, oh, I didn't have a conflict up here. It's like, okay, well, you didn't have a conflict, but did you have a conflict down here, right? In the place of the psyche that you can't see, that you are not fully aware of. And, that's why we want to bring more of those pieces of the psyche into our awareness so we can understand when there's a part that is, a little hesitant to be around someone who's expressing symptoms because, you have history in the past of getting around someone and developing symptoms. And so that belief system can be so deeply ingrained, even if the conscious 10%, is like, no, absolutely, I don't believe in contagion.
Yeah, I remember when I was first going down the kind of the HIV/AIDS rabbit hole, not from a G&M standpoint, but just, reading about, different stories. And there was an activist at the time, and I think she had tested positive for HIV. And she would talk about how she was continuing to have unprotected sex with her husband, and her husband never tested positive. you know? So it's like this big, scary thing. And yet he was quote unquote fine. My other question is based on the immune system. Do you think like the theory of the immune system, the way it's described from a more conventional standpoint, is there to kind of just like fill in the gaps for like the falsities of the germ theory model, you know, like to kind of propagate it up and be like, oh, okay, well, since, you know, well, you should have gotten it, but you didn't. You must have a healthy immune system.
I mean, they just have to have an explanation. And when you look at, you know, microbes under a microscope and you see the phagocytes like surrounding something, it's like, oh, it seems like it's eating it, like it's attacking it, right? But you have to be looking at it from that combative point of view. When you see it as a cleanup crew, right? Mm-hmm. Again, does the trash collector, are they attacking your garbage when they pick it up no, they're not attacking it. They are collecting it and they're removing it to a different location because it doesn't belong. It's like, that's what the body is actually doing. It's not a combative, you know, oh, I've got to defend. It's not war-based. It's a support system. It's an infrastructure, biological infrastructure that the bacteria do a job, they serve a purpose rather than, but as soon as you think in terms of good and evil, and this is bad because it's bad to be tired and inflamed. Oh, and it's bad to cough because it doesn't feel good. We think because it doesn't feel good, we equate that with, that means it's bad and wrong and it shouldn't be happening. And then, you know, and so really, I mean, it can be quite innocent with, you know, may not be quite totally innocent, but, you know, when you just think about, this is uncomfortable, this is an uncomfortable symptom, and we zoom in, we have these things that we invented called microscopes, and we see little things moving around and we say, aha, this is what's caused my problem. It's kind of makes sense that a person could come to that conclusion. But when you zoom out and you see that, you know, we can't consistently get it, you know, doesn't get sick every time they're exposed to this. That's really weird. You know, people drinking vials of bacteria trying to kill themselves and nothing happens. And it's like, okay, well, how is it that it's not consistent? Because it's not based on biological law. The biological law says bacteria are there to help and they're doing a job. And so the immune system idea makes sense. It's about context, right? If you zoom in and you're like, oh, this is the story, but you're missing the rest of the biological context, you could see how a person could inadvertently come to that conclusion.
For example, to bring in like the discussion we we're having earlier around drugs and poisoning, like when we say poisoning is weakening the system, like aren't we kind of saying the same thing though?
Saying what same thing?
Like say you take AZT and AZT is like causing poison or wreaking havoc within a system. Like what are we saying? It's kind of like a similar paradigm, right?
Well, that's something that doesn't belong. So it's like a mechanical thing. So something that bacteria belong there. They come from inside. So the body like generates its own bacteria. The pleomorphics, it comes from within. And so it's the difference between something that's exogenous or like chemicals coming from outside, getting in the body. That's like a mechanical thing versus a bacteria that is endogenous. It's originated inside of the body and doing a job and a function. You know what I mean? So it's the outside in versus the inside out.
Yeah. But I mean, separate from the bacteria discussion, like wouldn't we say that like, say taking a drug that poisons the body would weaken the body's the body's ability to do its job? Or to like, it's not about in the AIDS example, the people that were taking the AZT drugs, would they be less likely to overcome their conflicts?
Would they be less likely to overcome their conflicts
because of the poison?
I mean, I view that more in the fact that like the body is just doing a lot more, right? If you've got a certain amount of energy in a system and you start plugging a bunch of things in, and so the body has to, would that deplete the psyche of the person's ability to resolve the conflict? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, the person's psyche, you could resolve a conflict even if you're, depleted because you're taking a bunch of drugs. And so it's not, I don't think that in and of itself would, but it could, you know what I mean? Like everything you're doing is affecting your psyche. Taking a drug is affecting your psyche, and how you are perceiving your experience is affecting it. But I wouldn't say that that's like guaranteed.
If there's definitely poisoning taking place,
okay,
beyond the psychological aspect of it, if there's definitely poisoning taking place via whatever mechanism, would it be weakening the body's ability to resolve?
Would it weaken your ability to resolve? I mean, no. If once the conflict, if it's something, as soon as it can't happen again, it's resolved. You know what I mean? And so if you change the situation and that thing that was happening before can't happen again because that neighbor moved away or your mother-in-law died, it's like that conflict, regardless of what's going on with your poisoning and, you know, what kind of substances are in your body, once the conflict is over, it's over.
Yeah. And also too, from an immune system standpoint, like, sure, maybe like the immune system could have a role in if you're being poisoned, but there are other systems that are at place when you're taking an exogenous poison is coming into your body. Whereas the so-called immune system, the way we look at it from a conventional standpoint, they're dealing with things like when we talk about bacteria, viruses, and parasites, they're dealing with that more in that case. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think it's such a vague term, immune system. But like I think it's fair to say that there's definitely some bodies that would show more resilience and would operate more efficiently than other bodies. So like, how do you label that? How do you talk about that?
More vital, more robust, holistic body systems. I feel like that's
just what, I know. But I feel like that's just what people are saying when they say, "Oh, I've got a strong immune system. Like I'm more vital."
Yeah. Well, because in G&M they look at the immune system as a support system. So it's not like you said, it's not this war thing. And I think I've heard like the Vigilson brothers label it something else that kind of relates to it being a support system. So yeah, it's just a different way of looking at things.
Yeah.
Okay. We talked about HIV/AIDS, we talked about herpes, we talked about gonorrhea and chlamydia. Again, I'm using the terms that are like the conventional system gives. Other popular things.
Syphilis.
Syphilis, and then like warts and stuff, because I think people deal with like genital warts and other things like that. They might want to get some clarity on that.
Genital warts and like HPV. So the warts is a separation conflict again. So it just, again, depends on how the psyche perceive the contact. And so it's a wart is a hanging healing. So you're degrading tissue, building it back up, degrading tissue, building it back up. And so each time you do that, the wart thickens. And so that means that there was contact there that you wanted to separate from, and that there's a tract related to it that's keeping it alive, and so they say that, this is caused by the human papillomavirus, which can also cause cervical cancer. And so cervical cancer isn't about HPV, it's not about a virus, it's not about genital warts, it's about a sexual frustration conflict. And a sexual frustration conflict is not being mated. It's about mating. It's about not knowing who the father of my children is going to be. It's about insecurity related to the man in your life, the person that you're intending you want to procreate with, but there is questions about. And so that's the thing that leads to the adaptation of the cervix. And so that's where, they convince a woman, you need this injection, you need this vaccine in order to prevent this virus from causing, cancer in your cervix, when they're just completely unrelated. The injection cannot prevent you from having a sexual mating conflict with your partner. It can't prevent you from having a separation conflict with, someone that you've had intimate contact with. And so that part just doesn't make any sense. And then with syphilis, what are the symptoms for syphilis?
Real quickly, aren't there lower rates of cervical cancer in countries with arranged marriages?
Yes. And that, when you look at not knowing who the father of my children is going to be isn't a concern for someone who has an arranged marriage and knows you're going to marry this guy. This is the one that your parents chose for you. And therefore you will always be with this person. That is going to minimize the chance of you experiencing some type of sexual frustration, uncertainty regarding the man in your life. And so that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Syphilis.
Let me look up the symptoms of syphilis, because that one...
I just sensed something, skin rashes, mucous membrane lesions in the secondary stage, and potentially severe damage to the heart, brain, and other organs in late stage.
Okay, so we have a separation conflict. Once again, this is like most every of the different variations of things that break out on the genitals. It's a separation conflict, so we had a separation conflict. And then if there are additional organs involved, like the heart, is an overwhelm. Here we've got swollen lymph glands, self-devaluation conflict, sore throat, can't swallow conflict, hair loss, separation conflict, weight loss. Any active conflict can cause weight loss, muscle aches, self-devaluation conflict, fatigue, feeling very tired. That's going to happen during the healing phase. And so, actually, there was a little rhyme I remember from back in chiropractic school about syphilis. I think it was can't pee, can't see, can't dance with me, I think is what it was. And so I think that there was something having to do with the urinary tract. So there we have a territory marking. Something with the visual system. Yeah, I think it says, it can spread to the ocular syphilis.
And it
So
causes blindness. I feel like I remember hearing that syphilis may cause blindness.
Okay, so if someone is having visual issues, we have to look at a visual separation conflict, a fear from behind conflict, something having to do with the structures of the eyes, and then the joints. I think there's that's the can't dance with me is the joint issue. So self-devaluation. So there's some combination of experiences, a trifecta of experiences that leads to the presentation of this diagnosis label. And that's why we just always have to take it tissue by tissue. Anytime someone messaged me the other day and asked about this or that autosomal recessive, like abbreviation of this thing. And I'm like, what are the symptoms? And they're like, eczema and like rashes. It's like, okay, all of that gobbledygook is indicating this child is experiencing a separation conflict. And the person though, and this is the unfortunate thing, if a child is in the position where their parent has received, your child has, autosomal recessive immune, I think it was something like an immune genetic problem, deficiency, and it's like, no, that is scary. One, like that makes it seem like it's this big, scary, serious, where they can zoom down and look at the genes and say, you have this scary genetic condition. This young child has experienced a separation conflict. And I think it started at 5 months. It's like, okay, well, what happened at 5 months? Did mom go back to work? Did mom go on a trip? Where did mom go? Because for a 5-month-old, the whole world for that baby is mom. And if she's separated from baby for any length of time, this can create a separation conflict. And the solution, it's not going to be some complicated gene therapy or some type of, bizarre treatment. It's be with mom.
What's up, everyone? A little bit of a technical difficulty. Joel lost his power. So we're just going to continue on. And if he jumps on, he jumps on. But I was just about to say, in relation to what came before this, so is it any wonder that so many children, young children, babies, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, deal with skin issues? Because you think of like, and for a lot of reasons, I don't want to sit here and knock parents and mothers, like, depending on, their personal situation. But like, if you're leaving to go to work so early, like after having a baby, if you're putting your kids into daycare, things like that are obviously going to impact the psyche on the child, even though it's probably not super conscious for a baby. It's just happening at like an organismic level. Would you agree?
Oh, totally. I mean, it's just non-biological. And in modern life, we just don't even think about it. We're like, oh, this is normal. This, they should be fine. Like, we think they should just be fine because they're with, a loving daycare person or even a family member. But the thing is they don't smell like you. Like, you smell like milk, you smell like home, and being with you is to survive. And it's just primal, and like you said, it's like, it's organismic, basic, most biological part of me is saying, oh my goodness, if I'm not with this person who smells like me, who has my food, then I am at an existential risk.
Yeah. All right. A topic that obviously is something that people bring up often, like birth control. Like, from a G&M standpoint, like, how can that impact an individual? Like, is it just, I guess, talk about birth control from your point of view.
Well, one of the, from the biological standpoint, and this kind of goes back to the sexuality topic that we did a couple episodes ago, the woman who is not interested in having, babies or is wanting to pause her procreative abilities is in a masculine state, right? Like, there's a reason she's doing it. And it's not a feminine reason, right? It's I need to go to school, I need to go to work, I need to hold off on this. And so, and that, it changes her body chemistry. It changes her hormonal state. It changes who she's attracted to. So when a woman is on birth control, when she's not going through a normal cycle, when we're preventing it or faulting, going through, changing the way that the body's ovulation occurs and preventing pregnancy from happening, that changes the person you're attracted to, right? You're in a masculine state. You're going to be attracted to a softer, more feminine man, just because we always have to have a balance in the relationship, and so a woman who's on birth control, but that's even what they say. They're like, even if you're on, hormonal birth control or an IUD or something, that still won't prevent STDs. That's why they, have to do condoms too, in addition to it, because we can't have any contact on the body. And so, the birth control is, it's non-biological, because biology says have more babies, have more life, and to halt nature's natural impulse to have the pleasure of intercourse without the risk of pregnancy. There's a trade-off somewhere else too, like in the psyche of the woman, to pause the body in that way, and just the way that affects the way that she perceives reality, right? The woman who's on birth control, her perception of reality is shifted, right? Her chemistry is shifted until she comes off of it, and it just is another indication of how far we've come from nature, from doing what makes sense. And, and there are situations where, I know a woman who's had tons of difficulty. She's been on literally all the birth controls and has gotten pregnant like back to back to back for like multiple pregnancies. And it's been very, very difficult for her to find something that actually works, because again, nature's like, here, just keep having babies every time, the new cycle. And in nature, if a woman, after she gives birth and she can't have any stress, right? If she's simply breastfeeding exclusively, she should be prevented from ovulating for 2 to 3 years. And so there should be a window where pregnancy can't happen again. But because modern women are so, stressed, as soon as there is that stress, the psyche thinks, okay, there's room for a new pregnancy again. And so that's where, the birth control topic is a tricky one, and it makes sense, for a woman who's not in the position to raise a child. It's like, okay, what are we trading off though? There's always, we do have to make those conscious choices, figure out what am I trading off, and what does this make sense for my life long term?
Yeah, like for anyone listening, like we would get deep into this subject and other related subjects on our episode with Melissa. It was episode 123 called G&M, Sexuality, Identity, and Biology. So check that out. Again, we got hours of conversations with Melissa talking about G&M related things. Okay, so after having all this conversation about different symptoms related to so-called STDs, like what's your advice to people around this? Like let's say someone has been studying G&M and has kind of embodied the system, but are still dealing with symptoms that would be diagnosed as STDs, and they're looking to find a partner, or they are sexually active. Like, what do you recommend? Of course, everyone's an individual. They have to do their own thing. But like, what do you recommend is the best way to go about doing this and communicating to, let's say, a potential sexual partner?
Yeah. So this is, I've had this conversation with several people because they're like, okay, so, now I understand it, but the track could still be there, right? Because sex in and of itself can be a track. And so there's like this question of, if I get with a new partner and we're intimate, will I have an outbreak? Will I need to, should I explain this to them on the front end? How should, and my advice is the golden rule, right? Like, so if you understand that not everybody knows G&M, like it'd be cool. Ideally, let's have a, G&M dating app so that people who understand the biological laws can get together and we can live, fearlessly from the idea. Contagion and germs. And so that would be ideal. Like, do I want to share my intimate body parts with someone who, and open up the door at least for procreation with someone who doesn't know the map, who isn't on the same page or in that same realm of understanding? I think that varies from person to person, but ideally it's like, do you want to, get intimate with someone who shares your values and sees the world in a similar way to you? Because again, if a child comes into this world through this, intimate union, this moment of pleasure, how's that child going to be raised? Are we going to be, inviting tons of conflict potential for this one wants to vaccinate, this one wants to do a medical birth, this one wants to, home birth and not vaccinate? And so are we opening up that door? So this is kind of a bigger, philosophical, personal decision about like, who do I hook up with, right? Because, your sexual choices reveal things about, your psyche. It reveals things about you. And so, maybe you need to come to terms with, who am I choosing this? Am I in a constellation? Am I compulsively seeking, multiple sexual partners? And so, yeah, when it comes to disclosure and telling a person, hey, I have this thing that's labeled, it could be an interesting entry point for talking about GNM with this paramour that you have, that you are interested in this person. Maybe you should open up that conversation with them. But, you don't want to, because that's one of the things that people say, oh, so if it's not a germ, if you don't believe in contagion, so that just means people can go around spreading this or, not telling people about it. And that's not cool, right? Like, so you would want to share with someone who if someone you're with has a standard conventional understanding of things. You don't want to say, oh, well, I didn't tell you because I don't believe that's. Go on the front end, talk about it, tell them about it, share about it, explain, GNM to them. And if they're not on board with it, I would say that that's a pretty good, litmus test for, should I be with this person or not? Like, maybe they're not cool with GNM. Maybe you're like, okay, next.
Yeah, well, this is where discernment comes into play. It's like, sure, great, you have this knowledge now. And, okay, cool, I could just go fuck everyone. But no, because the reality is you can still get pregnant, or you can impregnate someone. And that's a whole nother thing. And, I can't tell you the amount of times I've either read stories or have had conversations with people where, ignorance to some degree, when you don't know about these subjects or you haven't looked into vaccines. And then it's like you get married and you have kids. And then now you start looking into these subjects and going down these rabbit holes. And unfortunately, very often it causes splintering between partnerships and the ending of relationships. Now, from some bigger picture, I'm not here to say that wasn't meant to happen for the lessons to be learned for individuals. But if you want to potentially lessen some suffering or the potential for suffering in your life, like, get really clear on your values and be curious about learning about these kinds of things. And then from that place, I feel like you could be more grounded to go, hey, I know what I value. Who do I want to be giving my energy to? Who do I want to be engaging in a sexual act with? Or who do I want to partner with, based on that. So, yeah, but I agree with you. Like, just be real as fuck, be open. Because again, having an uncomfortable conversation, what does that do to your growth as well? Most people push things under the rug, forget about the sex talk. Let's just talk about general difficult conversations. They just keep kicking the can down the road. They don't talk about things with their mom or their dad or their siblings, or their friends or their coworkers, where sometimes it's like, let's have the difficult conversation. And then more often than not, it's not as bad as you probably imagined it in your head to be. And then what does that do to you as an individual? You go, you know what? I stood up for myself. I was self-assertive. I built some self-esteem because I entered into something and I communicated something that was difficult to communicate. So I always think that's the best route. Of course, timing is everything to some degree, but, move forward, be authentic, be real, and then, keep living your life. Is there anything else that you want to kind of touch upon on this subject? We've covered a lot, but I know you've chatted about this a lot before, but is there something that we've missed that you really want to get people to kind of understand?
Yeah, I would just really look at, your story related. So if this is your thing, if you're like, yes, I've been, diagnosed or have kind of lived with this sort of shameful thing, really looking at the source. What was the conflict? Can you identify it? Do you know your tracks? That's how we work it. How do you work the conflict? You identify it. When did it start? Who was it with? What was the dynamic? And how is this still present in my experience? And, and what is it going to take for this conflict to be completely put to bed, right? A conflict is resolved when it can't happen again. When I can laugh about it, when I'm so, if I'm certain about my partner, I'm certain about who I am, I'm certain about who I'm with, right? And I'm not feeling this fear of separation or this desire to separate. I'm not in this wobble of, looking, I think something like the understanding your constellations, right? And understanding, if I, have this impulse to be with someone and then I can't be, or I choose to, I cheated on my partner once and I'm worried if I'm going to do it again. You have to be honest with yourself, look at these things, look at your tracks, and then just notice. Is this something that still strikes a chord for me, right? The conflict, when it's resolved, it takes on a completely different tone inside your psyche. It just doesn't hit in the same way. And if you can still have resistance or fear around the subject. I actually know someone who had intimacy with someone who was vaccinated and was concerned about the fluids that come out of the body from a person who said, and there was a separation conflict from that. And so that became this ongoing situation. And so again, looking at the choice to who am I uniting with? Who am I choosing to be intimate with beforehand? It's like, am I going to be okay with this? Is there a seed of a thought in my mind? Because people even felt that way just being around a person who has been vaccinated. And if they believe in, spike proteins and shedding and all of that stuff, and it's like just being near them, let alone being intimate with them. There's all sorts of stories of, they're going to be infertile. And then if you sleep with them, then you're, all of these scary things. What are you believing? You have to pull out, what am I believing? What are the fears? What made this a problem for me? Right? That's always the question you need to ask yourself when there's a conflict. What exactly made this a problem for me?
Yeah. I mean, like, control what you can control, like take responsibility for your thoughts, your psyche as much as you can. And I hear you. Like, I got to think, even in, like, before I knew all this knowledge, and I've brought it up to you before, but let's say in my early days where I was, I don't know, a little bit more promiscuous, like, I didn't have a lot of noise around my sexuality. I actually had a belief system that I had the immune system of Superman. Like, that was like a belief that I had, believing in the immune system in the way that the conventional model talks about it. And I was just like, I just didn't worry. I didn't worry about it at all. And I never had to deal with any kind of like potential symptom around that related to sexuality. I'm not telling everyone, hey, go have a belief system that you have the immune system of Superman and go and have sex with everyone. But it's just interesting, again, like the state of your mind, like how you view relationships, for an individual that maybe is dealing with a certain level of trauma and gets more into codependency, and then you have sex with someone and that person ghosts you. Like there's so many factors that go into play. So it's like, hey, like, get as healthy as you can, build self-esteem, work on your shit, and move forward from there. I think you might have better results in terms of how some of this stuff shows up in your life. But of course, it's a process. But I don't think I have anything else to say. Actually, one more thing before we go, because I think it relates to this subject. We've talked about constellations before, but I think like the Nympho and Casanova constellation are worthy of being talked about again, especially in relationship to, symptoms from, again, quote unquote, STDs.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because that's, I would say, who's more at risk for, the more sexual partners you have, the more potential we have for these types of conflicts. And again, that can be why having a more, if you have these morals around having one partner for your whole life, it's like, well, that one partner for your whole life is going to minimize the chance of having these sexual types of conflicts, right? Because if you know who you're going to be with, just like with the cervical thing, it's like, this is the person, I'm going to be with this one person, and we're going to exclusively be in this container for our whole lives together. And that is, that's safe, right? When there's a lot of people coming and going, and there's, this having multiple experiences with multiple people every time, it just kind of compounds, right? And it's interesting. I think like the woman stores like the DNA of every man she's ever been with. You know what I mean? Like there is an energetic imprint from every sexual encounter that you've ever had, right? And every previous one is going to color the experience of the next one. And so if you have this, for the woman, the sexual conflict plus the territorial loss, for the man, the territorial loss plus the sexual, for the left-handed woman, double sexual. When you have these conflicts, there is this compulsion to get into bed. You want, the man wants a conquest, the woman wants to seduce. And so we have these dynamics of really compulsive sexual behavior that's going to lead to more partners, more potential for infidelity, right? And when the infidelity happens, so if a Casanova is in a committed relationship with someone, but then, he is interested in leaving the relationship or having an experience, or, and he is torn, right? We have that torn energy of like, I shouldn't, but I want to, and I really shouldn't, but I really want to, and oops, I did it, and now how am I feeling about it, right? And is my energy split? And so that's going to increase the likelihood of having a sexual encounter that leads to some type of separation conflict, procreation conflict, territory marking conflict that leads to adaptations.
Yeah. How does like, I feel like you hear this often, like, let's say a woman who like, didn't have a good relationship with her dad or had an absent father, tends to not always, sometimes maybe go towards like wanting to find herself or be more intimate with a bunch of men. I know it's a general statement, but like, how does that relate with the constellations?
Oh yeah. So that's her first sexual frustration conflict is not, again, and remember, it's about the man in your life. And when a girl is a young girl before she's, looking for another man in her life, her first man in her life is her father. And it's that father. So what are daddy issues? Daddy issues is he was unreliable, right? He stepped out on my mom and he was abusive to my mom, or he was irresponsible, or I learned that I could not trust him. As soon as the girl has that conflict with her, I can't trust my father. He's not providing and protecting for me as he should. That's can be the first sexual conflict. Often is the first sexual conflict for the girl. And so those daddy issues, not getting attention from daddy, that means that I wasn't, didn't feel safe. Right? In my home, I didn't feel my sexuality wasn't safe. It wasn't protected, because that's what, the father is supposed to provide and protect the territory for the family so that the children can grow up without, fears within their territory, without conflicts within their territory. But if the big guy's gone, if there is no protection for the territory, the female says, oh, my sexuality is not safe. Right. And so she has her first sexual conflict. And so the right-handed girl, becomes more masculine. She has to protect herself, right? Because my sexuality is not safe. She becomes more masculine. And then when she has her second conflict, which is the territorial loss conflict, then she's an nympho, right? And so that's where the trope of daddy issues is very real, because it is a sexual conflict and then like a rejection, territory loss conflict, which you're much more likely to experience once you already, had problems in your territory, problems with your father. You get rejected by someone and boom, we're in the constellation, and then you're looking for love in all the wrong places, right? You're trying to fill your cup with something that is a deficit in your upbringing, right? In the father. And that's where, it tends to run in the family, right? It's not that it's genetic, but parents, so like if a nympho and a Casanova get together, right? Because they're compulsively wanting to have sex, and so they get together, they have children, but both of them, have wandering eyes, or at least one of there's potential for infidelity. And then as soon as there's infidelity in the relationship, the children, right, lose their territory. The boy has a territory loss, the girl has a sexual conflict, and then we raise a new generation of nympho Casanova, right? And it's not that you're destined to experience that. You have choice, right? You have awareness. It's just a person who's not conscious of these patterns, of these constellations, is going to be, your behavior is driven by your constellation, unless you are in the driver's seat and you have become aware of your tracks and your triggers and what causes you to go into certain states and, open yourself up to the potential of that. And so that's where it does become a legacy if we don't do something different.
Yeah. What's the male version? You kind of went into the details of like the female in terms of the primary and secondary conflict that create the nympho. But for a Casanova, what would that be?
So his is the territory loss. And so his mother is his first territory. So once again, if his mother leaves, if she is being abused, if she is, so the mother, if I lose my mother, if so parents getting divorced, we lose the territory, right? The home is no longer safe. Like as soon as the home is no longer stable and safe, the child can have a territory loss. And the male perceives it more in terms of like, my mother, is she okay? And if there's something not okay about your mother, right? And you as the young boy are having a territory loss, so that's going to be your first conflict for the right-hander. And then you'll have like a male, the left-hander will have a second territory loss, the right-hander will have a sexual themed conflict. And so that's when you get into the man gets into the Casanova. And those, again, they're mirror image brain relays, the territory on the masculine side, the sexual conflict on the feminine side.
And so sexual conflict could be like being exposed to pornography, like at an early age, or something related to that potentially.
Yeah. So sexual conflict, it can be a rejection, so I want to have sex with you, but I'm rejected. That's often what it is for the male, is a, unsuccessful, desire to be with someone. Same with the girl. She can have a territory loss when she is rejected.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I just want to reiterate too, like we're talking about this, it doesn't mean it's automatically going to happen if you've had this experience, but there's a potential for it to happen. I don't want to say like everyone that like their mother left is going to be dealing with this, because does it depend on how their psyche kind of perceives it?
Yeah, I mean, it's extreme, especially for a young child. It's like there's kind of a context for, I mean, it'd be hard for a child to not have a territory loss, like if their family is broken up. And so that's where, like, again, divorce is like one of the big things that can be the first conflict for the child. But not every child is going to perceive the situation in the same way. Certainly they could perceive it as a self-devaluation, or, it's very unlikely that there would be no, and I don't know if this is ever, this is theoretical, the idea that a child could experience, their parents going through a divorce and not have any conflicts at all. I don't know if that doesn't seem very plausible to me, but I mean, we have to do the brain scans to see.
For sure. Cool. Well, I think we covered so much in this chat. And as always, I'm really excited for our audience to get exposed to this material. I love you. You're amazing. So much respect to you and what you've done over the years, to help bring more awareness to Dr. Hammer's work. What would you like to leave our audience with? I know you have a lot of exciting things happening in your world and different programs, so please share.
Yeah. Thank you again for having me. I love being on. I love sharing it. I love just people having a new opportunity to learn the laws, to have the conversations, to really dig into the biological laws and how they apply to all the areas of life. I have new courses launching. One that just we sold it out. It's a biological woman, and so this is all about the biological conflicts that affect women. And so tonight we will be talking about, the brain levels and the estrogen and the testosterone and the conflicts. And so that will open up again in February. And then I have another course called Animirror, which is all about applying GHK with animals. And then also looking at the aspect of like, what is this animal trying to show me, right? Is this animal trying to teach me something? Is there some conflict that I'm not seeing that is being shown to me through my animal companion? And so that is super fun. That one so Biological Woman, that one's sold out and closed, but with the Animirror, you can join, like if you just want to join for a Friday, we're doing 8 weeks of live Q&A classes. And so you're welcome to pop into that one. And then Awareness School, that's our big one. We are doing that in a few weeks. And so we would love to, see you if you have any questions about any of the programs. And then just keep studying GNM, keep looking up the chart, keep, applying this knowledge in your life. And I know that you guys have a GNM study group, and Friends of the Truth. It's like, get around people who are having these conversations so that this is something that you're actively, it becomes such a natural part of your life, as it should be, right? We should have all been raised with this. This is your birthright to know how your tissues function. And so when stuff comes up, look it up. If stuff comes up with your kids or your animals or yourself, always be looking for the biological understanding.
Yeah, I think that's when it really lands for you, when you take this knowledge and you really start applying it. Like I met you, was it 4 years ago, I think? And when I first started getting into this, like, if I got a zit or if I had like diarrhea, I started being like, okay, what the fuck just happened? And every single time it makes sense. I'm not sitting there going, oh, maybe I have food poisoning or, some detox I'm having. Like, it was just very specific to, the emotional, psychological, biological things that like kind of caught me off guard that I was dealing with. So, it's life-changing stuff. Anyone that can live life with less fear and more harmony and more peace, you're going to see that manifest in your health in a positive way. Real quickly, you have a lot of programs going on. Is there like a single website that people can go to find all this stuff, or other links or other
drmelissasell.com. If you just click on my course link. I also, if you do want more on the STD stuff, I do have like a single class on STDs. And so if you're like, I want even more about that, you can check that one out. But yeah, just drmelissasell.com and click on the course link and you'll see all of the offerings.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you get a lot of value out of this, and we'll see you next time.
Well,
take care.
Man, those last 20 minutes of that episode were horrible.
Joel's back. He's got power.
They're probably the worst 25 minutes in Here for the Truth history. Not because of Melissa at all, just simply because of the lack of space holding and, direct tapping into our audience's collective questions that they have coming forth as they're listening to that conversation. Something that only a truly seasoned podcaster could really bring to the table.
By truly seasoned, he means someone who's done the same exact episodes as me. Anyways,
I lost power about with about 20 minutes to go. But I'm sure it's all coherent enough. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, for enjoying our podcast, for, being open to the diverse array of conversations that we enjoy bringing to the table. On that note, I want to highlight that there is less than a week left to join the next round of Rise Above the Herd, our 10-week psychospiritual self-development program. This includes 10 live integration calls with myself and Erasmus, 5 nervous system workshops with Dr. Sophie Fletcher, really a profound way to reclaim your joy and to build more sensitivity. And our 10 modules, 10 signature modules, custom EFTs, and there's a lot that goes into the stew that is Rise Above the Herd, but it definitely gets results, as no doubt you'll be able to see from the testimonials on our site. So if you're down, you can head to riseabovetheherd.co and submit an application ASAP as we begin on October 15th.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time, they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean, fast forward and